W.
Welcome back to Cohort W, the podcast where we dig into the stories, strategies, and leadership shaping the future of the Army Warrant Officer Cohort. I'm your host, Chief Warrant Officer Fore, Jessie Morlan, and we're continuing our deep dive into Season 4's central theme, the modernization of Warrant Officer Professional Military Education, or PME, and the voices that are helping drive it forward. Today's guest is a leader whose story spans over 3 decades, multiple specialties, and a deep commitment to developing others. Chief Warrant Officer Kelvie Fore enlisted in the Army in 1989 as a 31 uniform unit-level communications maintainer. He rose to First Sergeant and then made the leap to Warrant Officer in 2008 as a 915 Alpha Automotive Maintenance Technician. Since then, he's worn many hats, serving in infantry, engineers, artillery, logistics, and education. He's deployed to Cuba, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and spent 5 years shaping future warrant officers as a TAC officer and course director at Fort Novosel. Today, he continues his impact as the Warrant Officer Strength Manager for the Virginia Army National Guard, where he leads the charge on accessions and talent development across the Commonwealth. Chief Fore, it's an honor to have you on Cohort W. How are things in your neck of the woods?
They're doing great. It's a pleasure to be here as well. It's a beautiful day in Virginia, and the summer's about to kick off, so it's nice and hot and muggy, just like we like it.
Well, Chief, your journey from private to Chief Warrant Officer Fore has spanned over 35 years. You've served across multiple components and specialties. When you look back, what moments or experiences shaped your growth the most, and how did PME influence that path?
You know, when you look back on it, when you think about it, having been in 35 years, I spent the vast majority of it as an enlisted soldier. So a lot of it spans back to then when both my parents died when I was in my early 20s, not at the same time, but it was relatively close to each other. And there was an E7, Sergeant First Class Dave Fulcher, who was my supervisor at an FMS field maintenance shop that I was working at, and really took me under his wing, not just as an NCO mentor, but also as almost like a father figure. He helped me with financial questions, any decisions I was making, and he was just truly an influential leader and super smart, always there for me, and really pushed me out of my comfort zone as a young E4 to get myself out there in front of people who could make decisions. Because like back in the day, it was old G, and I got pretty good on it really quick, and he wanted me to be an instructor and teach the mate teams here in Virginia how to utilize that system when they would go out and do their inspections and whatnot. So, Sergeant First Class Fulcher was probably one of the big pieces. And then I can remember Fuzzy Baylor was his name, and he was an old W4 that would come in and do inspections on our shop, and just so smart. And I was thinking to myself, great day, how does anybody get that smart? And he's still in the military, and he's that old. And that's when I actually learned a little bit about warrant officers. I didn't realize that they could stay as long as they could, but just seeing his knowledge and how much he knew and how he was so receptive and open to helping people and giving good information and good guidance and being such an approachable person, you know, that was kind of the influence of what led me early on in my years, but we can talk about it a little bit later, what actually pushed me over the edge. But yeah, that's probably it. As far as PME goes, once I became a warrant officer, the basic and advanced course that I took just for maintenance, you know, it really didn't do a lot as far as developing me as a leader in the aspect of leading other soldiers and dealing with, you know, maintenance within a company or an FSC level. It's just not what basic and advanced course do. You know, it's more about your technical piece of it. Truly helped me, but the best part of it was it helped create and build more of my network of other 915s who were working in the same field as I was. It just let somebody else I could pick up and phone a friend.
So let's go back to 2007. You were a first sergeant, thinking promotion had plateaued. What pushed you to make that leap into the warrant officer ranks, and what's that decision meant for your life and career?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because so many people ask me why you become a warrant officer, and I would often ask candidates the same question: why do you want to be a warrant officer? Because everybody has to have their why, and for me, I had no aspirations of becoming a warrant officer. Even in 2007, my goal was set for sergeant major. I felt like I was set for it. I was a first sergeant, and truth be told, our media person here within the R&R battalion kind of labeled me a spite warrant, and that's exactly what it was. Me and a sergeant major, when I was a first sergeant, had a huge falling out. We really did. It was a respect thing. He thought he was right. I thought I was right. I did think I was not going to have the option of getting promoted. But then what kind of capped that off was, in a command leadership position like first sergeant, as an AGR or a technician soldier, you can only hold it for 2, 3 with the waiver. At least that's what the regs were back then. At least that's what was told. I didn't look it up. I wasn't a barracks lawyer. But I was basically told, hey, your 2 years is coming up. What are you going to do? And there was no E8 slots for me. So it was a threat of, you're going to go back. So I didn't work that hard in my lower enlisted time to get promoted to E7 and even to E8 like I was, to go backwards. So went to the Warrant Officer Strength Manager, actually our CCWO at the time. I reached out to him and said, hey, I want to be a warrant officer. And he never asked why. He put me in touch with the actual strength manager, dropped my packet, and the rest was history. And you asked how it impacted my life. Well, it woke me up. It's like a teenager. You think you know everything when your parents are telling you stuff and they don't know what they're talking about. People had mentioned the warrant officer thing as an enlisted soldier, but I knew what I was doing. I'm gonna be a sergeant major and had it all figured out. However, being a spite warrant, going to warrant officer candidate school, pinning on the W1, it was a life changer for several reasons, and I explain this. As an enlisted soldier, as a first sergeant, I always make not even the analogy, I tell the story. I was setting meetings, and we would talk about maintenance, and they'd say, what do you think we should do? And it'd go around the horn, and it'd get to me as a first sergeant, and I would tell them, I think we should do this. And I like it, first sergeant, I like it. And then we'd come back next month, and we're still doing the same thing. And what do you think, first sergeant? I'd say it again, and I like it. And nothing would happen. Then I went to candidate school, came back, and they assigned me to the same FSC that I was a first sergeant in. Go back to the same meetings. Well, now I'm wearing one block. I'm 5 weeks removed from being a first sergeant, sitting in the meetings, not even in OSQ. What do you think we ought to do, Chief? And in my mind, I'm like, I'm not a chief yet. I'm a Mr. Fore. Haven't got my second dot. But I think we should do this, which is what I said 2 months ago. Blew my mind, because then it was like, I like it, Chief, first sergeant. We're going to start. And they started doing it. So that opened my eyes to the impact that you can have just as being that SME with the rank of a warrant officer, and being able to do something that has an impact on the organization because you're a trusted advisor to these commanders. So that was the one thing. The second thing was, it made me realize how silly I am that I waited till I was an E8. And I'd tell all the candidates when I would talk to them, how many of you are under E8? And I was like, well, you're all smarter than I was at this stage of the career, because it took me that long to get here. So it's been the best decision I ever made. And it's one of the things I tell the applicants when I'm talking to them now is, I've heard a lot of NCOs say, I was going to do warrant. I wanted to go warrant, and wish they had. And I've even heard the commissioned officers say, I wish I'd have gone warrant. I wish I hadn't have done this. I have never heard a warrant say, this is the worst mistake I ever made. Should have never been a warrant. Never heard it. And it's 100% true. So it was life-changing all the way around.
Now let's bring in your current lens as the Warrant Officer Strength Manager. From your seat, how does the modernization of PME directly impact how we recruit, grow, and retain quality warrant officers, especially in the National Guard?
So that's kind of a little bit of a difficult question to answer about the PME piece of it, because like you said, that comes after the actual recruiting part. So generally when I'm recruiting warrant officers, the selling point definitely isn't, we're going to send you to school. We're going to send you to school, because they're going to school as NCOs. They're going to school, on the outside in their civilian education as well. So the PME aspect of it, especially the modernization piece, isn't much of a recruiting tool. Is it something that we talk about? Sure. Do they know they could potentially pick up other qualifications? In some cases, what I have found is the WOSM, a lot of times, if you look at all the proponents and what they want these soldiers to already be before they get there, sometimes I think to myself, my gosh, why do they need to go to basic course? They have all the certs that they're asking for already, but that's neither here nor there. How it affects us now, probably more than anything, would be more with your critical, not even critical. I mean, I guess they're all critical if you ask me, but your 120s, your engineer, that's a long school. Your 131s, long school. 170s, long school. The 255s, long school. For the National Guard, it has a huge impact on them because it has an impact of, number one, if they're living, like you said, in Northern Virginia, they have a Northern Virginia BAH mortgage, if you will. They're going to leave their job that they've already, have a life doing to go for however many months it is. Oh, and because it's over a certain length, then they're going to have to PCS. Well, that creates a hardship because they don't want to sell their home. They don't want to uproot their family. And I've heard people say, well, they want to be a warrant officer. That's what they do. And I'm thinking, oh, right. This isn't basic training. They're doing us a service. So what can we do to try to ease the pain on that? So as far as PME and recruiting, I really can't apply a lot of it to the actual recruiting part. I do know, though, once they get into it, and I can't speak for the basic, and I know they're doing this modernization piece with how they're, arranging the actual courses. But I do know some of the benefits that you get, especially, like for me, it was the ILE, and I think they're kind of shifting everything left a little bit so they get it a little bit earlier. The benefit that they're going to get is once they start into that PME piece, that they understand what these commanders are talking. They understand the doctrine, the JP50, the 3.0. They understand, and they talk about that at the PME. So then when you go back, you can relate your field to what that commander needs. So huge benefit in it. But again, at the stage of, as far as a WOSM goes, it's really not much of a selling point. I wish it was. I mean, I know that some of the MOSs, they get certifications and things like that. And we mentioned those to those select fields, but overall, the modernization of PME, do I think it's going to benefit the cohort in the long run? Absolutely. Does it have an impact on recruiting and retention right now? Maybe a little bit of the retention piece, especially with, how much they get, because sometimes I've seen this too. We spend a lot of money and time and effort training these soldiers up for not even a perishable skill, but a lucrative skill, and without throwing ADSOs on them, and I'm not saying that I'm a firm believer in ADSOs, but, we spend a lot of time and effort educating them up, and then they realize there's better benefits on the outside, stabilization with home, and they can make some money, with the skill sets that they've learned in the Army. Especially when you think about the engineers, the 170 cyber folks, and the 255 networking folks. Like you said, I always say the 131s, they get great schooling, and it's a demanding course, and they get a huge skill set, but there's not many people on the outside that hire big bullet launchers or targeting officers. So,
Chief, you've deployed to Cuba, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and also taught as attack officer at Fort Novosel. What lessons from the field do you believe PME must reflect to stay grounded in today's operational reality?
That's a great question. And, thinking about all those deployments, that one of the things that the modernization really needs to focus on, and I know at the lower levels, the WOBC, the Warrant Officer Advanced course, but I know they're changing. One of the things I think really, really needs to be looked at is not so much the technical piece that we do at those lower level schools. I think it's important. Trust me, I'm not trying to get rid of any type of learning is going to be good learning. I mean, it's necessary. But one of the things that we don't get enough of, especially at that lower level, best example is Iraq. So 2010 is when I was called up for Iraq. Our unit was mobilized because they said they needed an infantry augmentee. They needed an infantry battalion, basically, to go with a unit from another state to round them out. And that's what they got, was infantry. But then when they get there and they understand fully what the mission is, well, it's convoy security, and a lot of what we're doing is on trucks, and we're actually making up an entire infantry, almost a battalion-size element with about 95 pieces of rolling stock and zero maintenance. And they're begging for maintenance, and Virginia's like, hey, you asked for infantry, you didn't ask for maintenance. We have the manning document, and we have filled what you've asked for. Bottom line, it went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the on-ground commander requested that at least his maintenance chief be able to come with him. So, sure enough, I got a call on the phone. It's the first time I've ever been called by a GO on the phone. When I found it was a general, I stood to attention while he was talking to me on the phone. Either way, he he said I'd been requested and could I go? And I had 30 days if I could. And I was like, sure. So I did that. And I tell you that story to tell you when I got there, I still had no maintenance assets. I could fix some things, but I can't maintain 93 vehicles, MRAPs that I had never seen in my life. And I got 11 Bravos to be my maintenance section. And so when the units go out and they get to 13 volunteers, you know who they're picking. It's not the cream of the crop. And I don't say that to be belittling to those 13 soldiers. Those 13 soldiers, once I got my hands on them and stressed to them the importance of what we had to do and gave them the latitude to learn and work on stuff, we did a phenomenal thing. We really did. And they worked hard. And, you know, we took a fleet that was at about 65, 70% OR, which is operational readiness. It took us about 2.5 months, but we got it above 95, and then we never fell below 90 the rest of the time. But it took a lot of effort. What PME could have prepared me for was how to better identify problems and write an effective problem statement, to take the time to identify the problems. How am I going to present this to a commander so that I can get buy-in of these are the resources that we need, this is the stuff that I need, to where here I am, a young W-2. Granted, I had plenty of time as an enlisted soldier, as a first sergeant, of dealing with senior officers. It wasn't that I was scared to talk to them. It's just, how do you relate other than it's broke, sir? It's broke, and I need to fix it. I think the PME really needs to be designed a lot towards problem sets, you know, the art and design methodology, you know, the Army design methodology, understanding and learning that, because it's not just applicable to Army problems. It's applicable across a plethora of things. You just take that design to identify your problem. This is my current state. This is my end state. And this is what we need to do to get there. You know, you come up with your critical vulnerabilities, your critical requirements and things and like that, and to develop those lines of effort in order to overcome those problems, especially as these young warrant officers, because it's so, even on the Compo 1 side, you know as well as I do, they are hunting for those top blocks. And the more we can do in PME to prepare them to be able to work with those commanders and speak that commander's language, which is something I stole from the commandant down at Fort Novosel, because he was one of the reasons, you know, he talked about this is why we have the Common Core piece. I believe we need to integrate a little bit more of that into the first two levels, the basic and advanced. What we used to have is advanced. As we start to go forward. And I think that I know it would definitely help prepare these junior warrant officers in order to be effective, especially in the changing OE like you're talking about, understanding problem sets, understanding how you fix it, without having to go into the huge spectrum of MDMP, because that's a process, and we're not even going to talk about that. So not that it's a bad process, it's just a process.
So let's talk a little bit about National Guard challenges in PME. So National Guard warrant officers juggle a lot: families, civilian careers, state missions. What should PME modernization include to better support the part-time warrant officer's unique path?
That's another great question. So at the early levels, I think we pretty much nailed that down. They definitely need to stay on the technical piece, but integrate some of that, you know, art and design, Army design methodology, art. Yeah, we've already said it. Integrate those things into it. But then when we start to get to that W3, W4 level, those senior level things, what I have noticed with the Guard, and it depends on the MOS that you're in. If you're an engineer, you're going to be an engineer. That's exactly what you're going to do. However, if you find yourself as a PBO and you're not AGR, you know, the active Guard, you don't get the opportunity to work in that job as much as you would if you were on active duty. I think Compo 1 tries to understand how the Guard works, but sometimes they just can't wrap their head around it. They can't understand doing this thing part-time. So I think one of the biggest takeaways that I took away from not only my ILE but my SSE as well was we need to continue to have it as a blended course. It doesn't do any good to have it broken up to like some people are like, we need to just separate it. It needs to be Compo 2 and 3 and active duty. I think that would be the worst mistake ever. Because speaking from experience, I sat in there, and again, and it's all my fault. As a 915, that's my MOS. That's the job I was supposed to do. But like you said, I went to Fort Novosel in 2016. I stayed there for 5 years. I came back, went back to the shop, I could say the word T code was about all I knew about G Army, which is, the main data system that we used for maintenance at the time. I was there for 1 month and then I went to be the WOSM, and I've been that for 2 years. So I've been separated from maintenance for 5 years. I've been separated from the operational Army for 7 years. So going to SSC, being able to sit with my active duty counterparts, not just maintainers, but the 131s, definitely the MI, the military intelligence folks, aviators, just all the different backgrounds, having them to discuss what it is they do, how their job impacts national security, how the importance of what they're doing, how they help their commanders make decisions, informed decisions and things like that. So the PME, number one, needs to continue with what it is. It's across all three compos. But what I wish they would do when they're in their course development, that they look at what's the role of a PBO in the National Guard. What is it they do? What are some tools up their sleeve that they could potentially, what can we do to get this PBO some experience that he's not normally going to get? Because on active duty, they're running warehouses all day long. In the National Guard, not so much. You got your full-time folks that are doing that, but not on the same level as the active component. So I think the biggest benefit would be when they're doing that course development. And again, it doesn't need to be 50-50 or anything like that, but the only time we taught Compo 2 and 3 is when the instructor would ask, so on Compo 2, how do you do it? There's no slide, not that we need slides, but just the facilitation of it a little bit more would be super beneficial, because it's funny, because it's amazing how many times Compo 1 folks will come up to you and like, I had no idea that's what y'all did. And that's amazing. It's amazing that y'all have this opportunity, or you have this ability, or y'all can provide this or provide that. And so I would just say opening up that dialogue between the three compos more in the setting of the actual schoolhouse, but then also integrate it into the PME somehow, the actual POI, I should say, not PME. That again, king for a day, you don't want to do that. I'd be a W5 already. Just kidding.
So let's talk a little bit about the Accessions pipeline in the National Guard. From where you sit, how's the Accessions environment in the Virginia Army National Guard, and are there specific MOSs that remain critically short, and what's working to close those gaps?
So it's interesting you say that, because there are a lot of challenges with the missioning, how it goes. Every state gets a different mission. Maybe I should know more of how they actually come up with the numbers, but I don't. That's probably on me for not asking the questions, but I'm kind of busy trying to recruit new warrant officers. As far as it goes, it's one of the things, actually, when I wrote my paper in SSE about, a challenge that I feel like we in the Army have created. So in Virginia, you can go into the DIPRO. I don't even know what DIPRO stands for, but I know it. It's a lot of analytics and a lot of data on the personnel that's in your formation. But you can go in and you can pull a report and says these are the people that are eligible to be an officer, meaning they hit the 5 basic requirements: the 110 GT, the no physical profile, they have a security clearance, they're under 46 years of age. Of course, we're not talking about aviators there, and whatever the last one is. But either way, you can go in and punch that button. Well, Virginia has, roughly, let's call it 7,000 soldiers, plus or minus. I don't know exactly the numbers. But when you run that DIPRO report, it gives me a list of about 420 soldiers. So automatically, my pool, my talent pool, shrinks dramatically. Now, granted, that's counting the officers; they're automatically taken out because they're not they're not coming to me, even though I could talk to some of them. But it narrows it down because it takes all my lower enlisted out. So it really puts a strain on who I can recruit with just the 5 basic requirements. So then the proponents go in and they start adding their own. And I am not saying that there should not be technical qualifications or experience, certain number of years for someone to become a warrant officer. I 100% buy into that, because that's what makes us our SMEs, is the time that we have doing those jobs. The challenge is when they start throwing education requirements on there. You need to have this many college credits of math or this many college credits of English. I always felt like if it's important enough, and I've been told the reason we even went to that or did that is because warrant officers just aren't effective writers. But then the more I studied it, the more I found out that it's not just warrant officers, it's 85% of officers across the board aren't effective writers. So, and all of them have gone to college. So I don't know if having that college English, if it's a benefit to make it a requirement or if it's screening out some good technically qualified people. Because if writing is important, if it's as important as we're saying it is, and I believe it is, maybe we should teach it instead of leaving it to an institution, because the English that someone takes at UMass isn't the same English that someone takes from an online school from the university of here's your degree. So just having those certificates or those college credits doesn't necessarily, to me, it just makes another hurdle that doesn't need to be there. Are there qualified people I can recruit? Sure. Are they out there? Sure. But this is a new generation, and I have really struggled to find out what the button is to make them want to make that leap, because a lot of times they're content with where they are. You tell them about the pay difference between E7 and W1 and how once you make W2, you're making more than, you're close to the E9 type, and W3, you're already over that, and doesn't talk the money, you talk the autonomy to be able to work by yourself, the respect you get from your commanders. You lay out the benefits, and they're just, I got to figure it out. Recently, I've been trying more of it's a new experience because I was reading about it. The younger generation wants new experiences, so I'm trying to sell that piece as well. I don't want to say the pipeline is drying up, but I'm telling you, anything we can do to open the aperture to capture more talent. And again, I'm not saying lower what the standard is, even though people say, well, you're lowering the standards by taking English. Well, no, I'm not, because, Article 10 doesn't say anything about, that's one of the reasons I went Warrant, is because I didn't have to have a degree to get my foot in the door. But I did have to know maintenance. I did have to understand, and I had to demonstrate that I had several years of experience with that, and I'm all for that piece of it. So, I don't know. I think proponents should really take a hard look at that to say, and I understand it too, because trust me, I had a friend of mine pull the Power BI pull, and active Compo 1, their W1s and W2s are at 131%. Well, they don't have any problem at all. None. Because their active duty NCOs are seeing warrant officers all the time. They're seeing the benefits. They're seeing the money. They're seeing the life. They're seeing it. So they're recruiting the fool out of them. But then when you look at their 3s and 4s, they have a huge drop off, because it's like we talked about earlier. They're getting certifications, qualifications. They're tired of deploying. They get out. Toward the Guard, it's a little bit backwards. We're at 74% W1s, W2s. Reserve is 73%. So we're neck and neck there. But then, our 3s and 4s, we're a little bit higher than the active component is. So anything, and that's the other thing is, I feel like Compo 1 sees it from their lens and really doesn't take into account the impact. And a lot of the proponents have done it. They have separate qualifications for, you got to be an E6 on Compo 1, but E5 Compo 2 can apply. So they have done something. I'm not sitting here to say Compo 1 hates us. That's definitely not where I'm going. But I think it's been a minute since we've reassessed or reevaluated that. And I think that would benefit. As far as Virginia, we just stood up a DIVARTY, and I was already short of the targeting officers, and I think targeting officers are short Compo 1 as well. They're hard to grow. They've got to be wicked smart guys. And like you said, it's a demanding job, so it's not like everybody's jumping at the bit to take on more responsibility. So I feel like if maybe the NCO cohort or NCO Corps, embraced or encouraged more taking higher responsibility and not frown. And I have seen this on Compo 1 and in the National Guard. A lot of times your senior non-coms, and I understand it because I was one, you don't want to lose your good NCOs. You don't want to lose them, but that's how they're looking at it. They're looking at it as, if I take, Sergeant Snuffy, who's doing 80% of the work around here, and we go make him a warrant officer, well, I just lost 80%. Well, not necessarily, because there's probably a good chance he's coming back to that unit or somewhere close, and he's still going to have that impact. Not to mention, this is soldier care. Take care of your soldiers. But I feel like a lot of times some of the senior NCOs would kind of get in the way of it. And again, I'm not painting with a broad brush. I'm not bashing NCOs here. I have seen it personally with soldiers on Compo 1 and in Compo 2. So for us, like you said, the biggest challenge that we have is the 131s, trying to reach out to them. I have a huge deficit in that. It's difficult to recruit them. I will tip my hat to the schoolhouse down there at Fort Sill, because they opened it up. Instead of just being 13 career management fields, that 11s and 19s could apply for it, because they had that combat arms background. And I even used that as a ploy with my artillery folks. I'm like, if there would have been a warrant officer position for 11 Bravos, and me having 11 Bravo background, if there was an MOS that only I was qualified for as an 11 series, this is special. And we were failing to get it done, so we opened it up to the artillery. I would hang my head in shame. This is your positions, and they're farming them out to the blue legs, and so I try to use that too. Sometimes it falls on deaf ears. I don't know if I've had people go home and swear about me, but that's the biggest struggle that I have is growing these 131s, because especially with a Divardi, because you think, a division asset they don't grow their own anything hardly, because, it's a leader. It's a decision-making place. There's not a whole lot of worker bees there. So they're the ones that are pulling from the units to fill those positions. And it's a challenge in the Guard, because if you look at where our artillery is versus where our Divardi is, that's quite a drive for these folks on a drill weekend. And when you look at the money, they're like, I don't. And that's the other challenge I face, is there's a lot of re-enlistment bonuses. And we as warrants, we don't have any bonuses anymore. I am not a fan of bonuses across the board. I do this FTF. It's for the flag, brother. This is why I'm doing it. It's not, I enjoy getting my paycheck. And if people said, are you doing this for free? No, of course I'm not. But I didn't need a bonus to do this. And I think we've created such a bonus mindset that everybody feels like that they're entitled to a bonus, even if they were an average soldier. If you want to keep me, you're going to pay me, brother. And I think that's created, and it's difficult for me, because I can't argue if I've got an E6 that's super qualified, would be a great warrant officer, but they're going to give him $20,000. You know how long he's got to drill as a W1 and 2 to make that kind of money? I can't compete with that. So that makes it difficult. But again, I don't want anybody to think I'm bashing any system or policy that there's. I'm not. I understand why we're doing things, but it's that ripple effect, the second, third order effect, I should say. There's other effects that adverse, because again, at the end of the day, they want the numbers, they want to get the people, they want the bodies, and not just anybody. They want qualified people. I get it, but it does present another challenge, especially for your WOSMs out there trying to recruit young warrant officers.
So you work with soldiers every day who are on the fence about going warrant. What's your message to them? And how do you sell the long-term value of PME and this career path?
So with the young applicants, when I go to approach them and start talking to them, because a lot of times, it's a phone call because they've gotten my contact information off of a flyer or something like that, and they want to ask questions about it. The first thing generally is they're like, I want to be a warrant officer. And I'm like, well, great. I want you to be one because I have a mission. And so, then when you start talking to them about, what's your background, how long have you been in this? What are you doing? The sad part is when I do unit visits, most of the conversations are with E3 and E4s. They're fascinated with it, and they're as hungry as they can be for it. They're like, yeah, I want to be that guy. Then they get settled in their NCO routes. They get some, they get a little bit of, they get that stripes on their chest there. They get a little of authority. They get comfortable. So what I do is I try to challenge them of, look, you should be preparing the folks that are under you to take your position. You are obviously in a place to where you've got the technical expertise, you've got the responsibility and the leadership attributes. You need to take that next step, number one, to advance yourself in your own career, but also open up the door for someone else to come in and get promoted behind you, because it happens a lot in the Guard. We don't have the entire continental United States and OCONUS to promote people to. We're kind of limited as to what we have in a state. So I try to encourage them for multiple reasons. Number one, it's for self-improvement, but two, it also, it benefits the soldiers under them. It allows them to take roles and greater responsibility. We said this earlier, I really don't pitch the PME piece to it. Generally, if they ask the question, I explain to them, this is what I know about it. I give them the resources. This is where they can go read more and more about it. But I will say that most people that come to me to become warrant officers, they're really not, they never really, when I ask them why they want to be, and there's several, the biggest reason is they're struggling to get themselves promoted because they're in a dead end slot. They can't go anywhere. So it's self-serving, which that's not a bad motivation to take on new leadership, especially if they're going to get good, effective mentorship from warrant officers and TAC officers as they grow through the process. But again, they don't talk much about what educational benefits are they getting or how the PME is going to help them. Generally, it's after they're already in and they're pinning the new W1s, they're getting ready to go to WOBIC, and then that's when they come back and they start talking to a little bit of the service after sale of, this is what you can expect, this is what you need to take away from it. Ask these type of questions and get ready to get after it.
We love real stories on this show. Can you share one where you saw someone you mentored or recruited really shine and represent the kind of warrant officer the cohort needs going forward?
Well, if I had to pick one off the top, it was that's a tough one because it's funny because I spent that 5 years down at Novosel, and there were several candidates that reached out to me after the fact and talked to me about hey, I appreciate the mentorship, this has been beneficial. So you get a little bit of that affirmation, but we're in a fast-paced world now to where you don't get a lot of feedback from people. They use you and lose you, because they're moving on to the greatest thing. And trust me, I didn't do that job in order to get, hey, attaboy, thanks for all you've done. It wasn't that, but every once in a while somebody would reach out. We did have one. I didn't recruit him. However, my predecessor recruited him. He had a medical issue that had to be taken care of. So he had to go through the waiver process. It took, by the time he was ready to reapply, I had taken over, and I came in cold, so it took even longer to get it done because I was stumbling my way through the thing. And I don't know if I had anything to do with this, and I really don't think I did, but it was a breath of fresh air, and it was so that's the word I'm looking for. It was so uplifting because he asked me about that, and I said, well, how long have you been in E6? And he was explaining it to me, and we were doing the numbers, this, that, and the other. And I said, well, I think you're going to make it. If you graduate on this month, you'll have the 2, blah, 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 blah. He's like, Chief, it doesn't even matter. He says, I want to be a warrant officer because I want to make that impact. I want to be able to work with these soldiers, and melting my face off. If I could promote him to W2 right then, I would have. And it's amazing because, he went on, he's doing great things in his unit. He's going through, I get reports back on him of how he is making a huge impact. Because he was already one of these guys that was super technical in his job just because he works for an agency that's what they do. So he brought so much to the table, but his willingness to just, he didn't care about the benefit to himself as far as I need to get promoted quick or anything like that. He just wanted to get the rank so that he could be in there and start making an impact in the organization it is. And every time I talk to him or any of the people that are around him, they just nothing but great things to say. And it just, again, it's one of the things at the end of the day makes you think, I'm glad that I was mad when I was doing that packet, but I'm glad that it worked out because, some of the packets are difficult, not because of the individual, but just, the loopholes, not the loopholes, but some of the things we have to jump through. So, yeah, that was a pretty big deal. And I did have one candidate, and I thought this was great. This goes back to Novosel, and I don't know when you went through, but a lot of us can relate to back. Like I said, I went through in 07. I didn't have it as bad as the people in 06. I didn't have it that bad, but it wasn't great. And then everybody who's had it after me didn't have it as bad in my book. But regardless, first couple 2 or 3 days there was high stress for these candidates. And there was one that had his ruler sticking out of his assault pack. And I went into him like he was driving a tank in a residential area at overspeed. I mean, I just made it this big deal, explaining to him how he needs to secure his gear, and I'm knife handing, and I'm giving him the business. And wasn't even my class. I was just there for the integration. They graduate 5 weeks later. He's walking through the first walk. I didn't even recognize him, and he came up to me and he's like, Chief Fore. I'm like, yep. He says, I said, congratulations. He said, thank you. He said, do you remember me? I was like, nope. He's like, I had the ruler sticking out of my assault pack. I was like, I remember now. He's like, I just want to say thanks. And I'm like, all right. He's like, when I got to my room that night, he said, when you got in on me, I was thinking, what a jerk. And that's not what he said, but he was like, what a jerk. He's like, this guy's going on and on about this ruler and this, that, and the other. He said, but then when I got back to my room and I thought about what you had explained about security, just, small things, attention to detail, taking care of your stuff. He said, I understood the importance of what you were saying, not so much in how you were saying it at the time. He said, and it really did set me up for success for the rest of the course. He said, so for that, I appreciate it. So whether he went on to do great things for Compo 1, I don't know, but it was just a little affirmation back from that soldier that, yeah, sometimes, especially the first 3 days, I was a real jerk about it, but we spend the rest of that time really trying to set that foundation to set them up for success. So I'd like to think that everybody that I've come in contact with has gone on to do great things. That's what I tell myself anyway, to sleep better at night.
Well, I'm sure they have. And to answer your questions, I went through in 2000. So okay. I was one of the oldie goldies, class 007. And,
wow.
But I do remember, those experiences, and definitely share that same where the light bulb went off. I was like, yeah,
right.
Okay, I see why that happened now. And, I'm very thankful for those lessons too. At the moment they're hard lessons, but, super thankful at the end that we got the point across and we learned something new. So.
They really, and it's funny, and I didn't mention this because you were talking about things that had an impact or an influence on me. I talked about Sergeant Fulcher, and I talked about Fuzzy Baylor, one of the young warrant officers, and there's several other warrant officers that I dealt with throughout my career in maintenance. But I will say this, and I didn't mention it then, but I think it's worth mentioning now. My experience at First Walk, I was a TAC officer for about 18 months, and then I was the TAC certification course director for about a year, where I trained TAC officers, and then I finished out my time there as an instructor working in the comms department under CW4 Hauser at the time, retired W5. But my time as a TAC officer was incredible in the fact that what I learned from the candidates, well, number one, what I learned just about time management, how to manage my time as a TAC officer, trying to conduct counselings on 36 candidates that were mine. I had to do it 5 times in 5 weeks, and I've got to do small group discussions with them. I had to really learn time management, and I was so much more effective when I got back to my unit in the States based on what I learned there. But the biggest takeaway is that one-on-one interaction that I would have with so many of those candidates. Of course, there's several of them that I couldn't even mention, but there's a bunch that I could specifically point to where they enlightened me on influence and, leadership and what's expected of a leader and what their expectations were and what they had experienced as soldiers getting to that point. Early on, I'd call them kids, and then I quit doing that quickly because they're not. So many of them they're there for one reason, that's to become a warrant officer. They're not there to cut up and be fools. So I can't say enough about how much I just learned from working with the candidates, from the candidates themselves, to make me a better leader when I got back, to the state after I left there. So anyway, it was a great time, and I recommend it for anybody. So if they get the opportunity to have a chance to mentor a large group of young warrant officers, take that chance. It's very well worth it. It's demanding. So if you don't have the stomach for it, or you don't have the energy levels, then stay home. But if you think you're up for it, it's a great time. It really is.
Let's shift now and talk about the Guard's role in the cohort's future. Looking Army-wide, what role do you see the National Guard playing in the modernization of the Warrant Officer Cohort, and how can PME evolve to support that role more intentionally?
The National Guard Warrant Officer is going to have a huge impact, just like we've had throughout, especially since 9/11. When deployment started ramping up and the active duty started to get exhausted with all the rotations, and then knowing that so much of the artillery is with Compo 2 and so much of the support is with Compo 2, and the Guard really had to pick up and fill that role. And that's no slight to Compo 1. They have their role, we have ours. So it's critical that the National Guard be involved in that, and that they already are. There's no way to get about it. We're doing deployments all the time to different areas, even now that we've left, Afghanistan, and we don't technically have a combat mission right now. We're still deploying all over the globe, Africa, Poland, where you name it. We're going lots of places. So the Compo 2 warrant officer is going to have a huge impact, because a lot of times we're going to be falling in on commands or under the commands of our Compo 1 brethren and sisters, and we need to be able to perform at the same level as our Compo 1 counterparts. PME is going to play a huge role in that. And again, it kind of ties back into what I was saying before. We need to take the time to, during the PME development or, the course development, how do we plug in the National Guard so they understand what it is, the mission? Because for years, we never deployed as a full organization. They piecemeal us out, and we'd end up stuck here or stuck there and spread out all over the countryside. But having that ability to work more with a cohesive level with our active duty counterparts, I don't know how much PME would be able to do that, but I think that's one of the, again, we need to keep it where it's all three of us are together, talk to each other about what we're doing, and learn from one another. Because what I found when I had deployed, it was the senior warrant officers who had deployed multiple times with Compo 2 soldiers who understood the value that the Guard soldiers brought. Yes, this is an 11 Bravo, but back home he's a carpenter. This guy can build a deck on the back of our chew if we can get him some wood. The maintenance guys were full-time maintenance techs at the units in their states. And, yeah, they weren't just mechanics. These guys were mechanics that didn't just work on rolling stock. They were working on night vision. They were working on missile systems. They were working on radios. They were doing lots of different things. The senior warrant officers on Compo 2 that had the opportunity to deploy multiple times on Compo 1 that deployed with Compo 2 warrants understood the value that the Guard brought to the warfight. And understood how to exploit it and how to utilize it, not exploit it, but utilize it effectively as a force multiplier instead of this guy's a weekend warrior. He doesn't know what he's doing. And I think PME helps bridge that gap. It brings us together because I know, like you said, I recently graduated SSE and I enjoyed it. I didn't like all the papers I had to write. I didn't like the discussion boards I had to do because I didn't like school when I was little. I still don't like school when it comes to the academia part, if you will. I do enjoy learning, and I enjoyed my time there just because of being able to listen to the experiences of what Compo 1 is doing and what other compos are doing throughout their states and the type of missions and the things that they face. It's a very unique blend, and I think the more PME tries to focus on how we can actually blend it rather than making it Compo 1 centric, which was what we've done for so long. And I understand why. I mean, that's the ready force. That's the active component. That's the one when the balloon goes up that they're getting a call. They're ready right now. I get it. But still, if it's going to go more than 30 days, they're going to need that Compo 2 aspect. It's going to go rolling in there with them. So the more we can do to help build that cohesion, the better off we'll be as an organization as a whole. Because we all wear U.S. Army on the uniform. It doesn't say National Guard. It says U.S. Army. So, yeah, that's my thought process on it.
All right, last question. So, Chief, you've got decades of perspective. If a young NCO walked up to you right now asking for advice on becoming a warrant officer, especially in this new PME environment, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them you're making the right choice. You're making the right choice. And the reason you're making the right choice is because of what we talked about earlier. You're taking on new responsibilities. You're going to be able to take your technical expertise and you're going to be able to hone that. I tell them this is the beauty of becoming a warrant officer. You're not a commissioned officer where you kind of plug and play and they can move you. They're going to keep you in that technical field. You are going to be afforded so much more opportunity to truly hone your skill as a warrant officer than you will even as an NCO. Because as an NCO, you're herding cats. You're taking care of the enlisted soldier. You're taking care of your squad, your team, whatever it is. You're running constantly. Not to say you're not going to be busy as a warrant, but you're going to be busy doing your warrant stuff most of the time. Not trust me. We don't live in a perfect world. There are going to be times we're going to pull an additional duty. We're going to do something, but you're going to be afforded that opportunity. So I tell them you're making the right choice because number one, you're going to be more technically savvy. You're going to get the opportunity to go to schools and they're going to bring you up to speed on what your O-grade counterparts are talking, how they're thinking, what they're working on, so that you can better communicate to them what problems they're going to face in your field and how they're going to be able to fix it. Oh, and to boot, you get to stay till you're 60. The National Guard has a great promotion system for our warrant officers, and you're going to start making more money in the long run. Not so you can keep your TRICARE for longer if you stay to age 60. So I try to hit all the hot marks with them, but definitely I talk to them about that. You get to take on more responsibility. You truly get to be that subject matter expert And what's really nice about it is because so many times we get into that, and I don't, again, not with a broad paintbrush, talk about how, NCOs, backbone of the Army. They're the disciplinarians. They're the ones, knife-handed, keeping everybody, good order and discipline. I get it. You kind of get to step back as a warrant officer. Doesn't mean you let same standards slide. Doesn't mean I don't enforce the standard as a warrant officer, but I don't have to do it near as abrasively. I don't. I can do the disappointed dad look, and it works way better. And I get the opportunity to be approachable. I love it when young soldiers come up and talk to me, whether it's about maintenance, whether it's about warrants, whatever. I like for them to come up and talk to me, and I want them to do that. So as a warrant officer, you're able to drop that grimace and that tough guy or, abrasive personality that so many of the NCOs have. Again, not bashing them, but it's just kind of how we were groomed. I mean, I was like that as a first sergeant. Man, I'd lose my mind on stuff. It's just how we were groomed as NCOs, but you get to take that opportunity to step back and truly be that, innovative integrator of emerging technologies and be dynamic teachers and warfighters. You get that opportunity as a warrant officer that you don't quite get as an NCO.
Chief Fore, thank you for sharing your story, your leadership journey, and your insight into how we build a better future for our cohort. From recruiting to readiness, you're a great example of what it means to serve with purpose. Yeah,
well, I really appreciate the opportunity. And, I hope a lot of people hear it. I hope a lot of people hear it are also enlisted soldiers that are looking to take that step. And as far as being a leader of purpose, I don't think there's any place else that you get the opportunity to be that leader of purpose. Just like I said before about being that subject matter expert in your field. Every day that I go in, I have a focus to do what it is I've been hired to do. Are there times where you've got to put out other fires? Sure. But for the most part, I am able to have that latitude, have that respect and trust of my commanders so that I don't have to have a short leash. They don't have to, check up on me. Where is chief? And that's not because of me. That's because of other warrant officers who have gone on and done the right things and have set the standard so high and have been so smart and have sacrificed so much to build that trust that we have with our O grades. So being a warrant officer allows us that opportunity to continue to be that leader with a purpose to, number one, ensure that we are doing what it is we're supposed to do, which is win America's wars, defend the people of the United States, enjoy the prosperity and the freedoms that we have, and get paid while we're doing it. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege. I'm thankful to have been able to do it. I don't know how many more I got left in me, but I'm going to do it as long as they'll let me. And again, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences and my thought processes on this.
Well, thank you, sir. And to our listeners, if you're an enlisted service member thinking about the warrant officer path, don't wait. Ask the questions. Find a mentor, engage with PME, because the future of the Army isn't just about what we fight with, it's about who leads us forward. This has been Cohort W, where we build the future one conversation at a time. Until next time, stay ready, stay relevant, and always lead from the front.